let me explain something to you people out there. You see, when we put this show together, we were about 8 minutes over. You know?
See, so we cut out most of the singers in the comics.
See?
See, because he's the singer and I'm the comic, and if we had others, well...
Oh, stop a second.
The legendary co-creator and producer of Sanford and Son and All in the Family, the late, great Bud Yorkin, today on Pop Goes the Culture. Hi, I'm David Levin, and this is another jovial episode of Pop Goes the Culture. This is one you're going to want to sit through. Today, we're dipping into the archives for my conversation with the television legend who passed away not long ago. Now, if you were around during the 60s or 70s, unless you were one of those people who only ever watched PBS, then you definitely saw a TV show created or produced by this guy. Along with his partner, Norman Lear, he was responsible for Sanford and Son, What's Happening, Good Times, The Andy Williams Show, and of course, All in the Family. I'm talking about Bud Yorkin, and during our conversation, this comedy icon covered all those shows, plus his work in the movies, including Divorce American Style, Cold Turkey, and, oddly enough, Blade Runner. As Yorkin told me at the time, he never planned to write a memoir. He honestly thought no one would be interested, if you could believe that. So this may be the closest thing you'll find. That's why this is a 5-part conversation, and you're going to want to stick around for the whole thing. In part 1, we talked about how Bud Yorkin got started and what it was like in his early years working with comedy legends like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis and Abbott and Costello, plus a dead guy on a live show.
Start at the beginning. Okay, you were born February 22nd.
That's right. I was born in Washington, Pennsylvania, in the Washington Hospital, and of course the nurse was Martha Washington. But I was born in Washington, Pennsylvania, on Washington's birthday.
Did they? How did you first get involved? What was your first experience in the biz, as it were?
In the business, I'm one of those strange guys that graduated at Carnegie Tech at that time with a electrical engineering degree, and but while I left the last year and a half of my stay and went into the Navy in World War II, and 3 years later I came back and finished and got myself a degree. But while I was in the service, I started to write little sketches, which was very powerful for me because I could get to see someone laugh. And when we were aboard ship, why they'd laugh at anything. You know, you could put a nurse's outfit on one of your buddies and a wig, and you got a big laugh. And so I thought, when I went back to Carnegie Tech, they have one of the finest drama schools there is. It's now called the Carnegie Mellon, but and I tried to get into the drama department, and they said, "Why? Why would we take you in? What, So I hung around with a lot of the dramats, and they said to me, you should come to New York. You hang around, you love theater, see what will happen." And in 1948 this was, and so many companies were looking for engineers, DuPont and RCA, and all of them were looking for electrical engineers, a huge shortage. And my father couldn't believe it when I said, "I think I'm going down to New York and try to be a writer." He said, "A writer? What are you going to write?" I said, I haven't got the slightest idea. But I said, "But I'll tell you what I'll do. If I can't get a job within, well, let's say 8 months or a year, then I'll take the job wherever I can get it." So I went down very naively, and make a long story short, I couldn't get a job, not with anything in the theater. Besides, I guess if I could have gotten into the Stagehands Union, I could have carried some of that, but I couldn't get that. So I finally got a job with a company called U.S. Television, repairing television sets and installing them. And it was, in those days, they took a little 8-inch orthicon tube, put it up to a mirror, another mirror, and you had a fairly large picture, not very good looking, but big. And they put it in all the bars in New York. They all had these television sets, and the big night was always Tuesday night was Milton Berle in those days. Friday night was Pabst Blue Ribbon Fight, and Sunday night was Ed Sullivan. Those are the three big nights. And one night I was late bringing the equipment in with my partner. That we were out in a truck repairing things, and the phone kept ringing. It was I think it was on a Tuesday night, and the guy that picked up the phone, and he said, "This is Jim's bar down on 43rd and Broadway." Yeah, I don't have a picture on my television set. And he said, "I got a bunch of people. I got to get some people." And I said, "Well, gee, wish I could help you, but this is too late for me to help you." And he said, "What do you mean, too late?" And I knew the guy was panicked then. And I said, "Well, I'm married and I have 2 kids, and I got to get home." And he said, "Well, it's worth anything for you." I was 25 then, 26, so I didn't have any kids, nor was I married. So he said, "I'll do anything for you to fix it." So I said to the other part, "You want to go down, make a couple $100?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how about $200 for?" He said, "You got it." So in the car we went down and we knew right away, because what they tried to make a bright picture on those things, and we were burning out. In those days, they had vacuum tubes. They didn't have condensers, so we were blowing those out. So we kind of fooled around for a long time, for 15 minutes we were geniuses. Then we pulled the vacuum tube, put another one in. "Oh, there's the picture. Oh, what do you want? You want to eat here? You want to do it?" So we had dinner there, took our $200 and left. And then I said to him, "What we should do is come in late every Tuesday night, and you want to work on Friday night?" And I said, "I think we could make a little money here." So before it was over, I was making really good money, because I'd come in late, and Al Rosenberg, he was my driver, and we were all in the truck. And then I had applied to NBC, and right in the middle of when I was doing very well, I got a job at NBC going into executive training course in engineering. So the next thing, I had to quit this job of putting up television sets and repairing them, and go to NBC, because I'm making only $200 a week there to start with, at $250. I can't remember what it was, but pretty close to that. And that was my beginning into the business.
Good money in those days, though.
Yeah, $250. I would have signed for life, to be honest with you. But yeah, that was pretty good money in those days.
So how did you transition, and what was your first writing assignment?
Well, what happened was I was on the engineering staff for a little over a year, and I did every job that engineering that they had. They were teaching 3 of us. In fact, Carl Lindemann stayed, and he became one of the top engineers there. And so we were on camera for like 5 weeks, and then we would go on the microphone boom for another month, and then you go into audio and start to learn what an audio board was about, and then you'd go into engineering where you would repair, and you start to realize what made a camera go or what so forth. And you had a pretty good, by the end of the year, we went into master control. We learned I think there were 7 of us, and we learned, we were really. But in the meantime, I was writing little things that I didn't like about shows that I could have written it better, or he could have directed it better. I was doing all those notes, and then I'd send it to the guy who was running the local NBC station there, and I was very nice, but I said, I just want to tell you my critique on the show. If these are helpful, I'd like to. And finally, about at the end of the year, they had no unions at that time at NBC, so they were going into negotiations with Bob Sarnoff at that time, and they asked me and 2 other guys to represent the unions. They didn't have any penalties if we worked well into the middle of the night. They call us an 8 o'clock call the next day. We had no 8-hour turnover. We had no short turnover. We had no pay for late lunches. All the things that and no. You had no desire to get any kind of promotion, because they never promoted any. And so I was in the middle of this whole negotiations with NBC, and they were joining NABET then, National Association of Broadcast Engineers and Technicians. And when they finished, they were talking about what other things do we have to work with. And I said, it's interesting, you guys never promote anyone from the inside or change. You always bring somebody from the outside. Nobody gets a chance inside. And they said, well, yeah, we try. We try to keep our people happy. And they go, and I said, well, for example, myself, I sent a lot of things to the program director. His name was Ernest Walling. I'll never forget it. And I said, and if you look at those, I think there's about a year's worth of papers of kind of what I felt about shows, because I think I'd be very good in some area of production, or what do you think you do? I said, well, I don't know what I do. I mean, I haven't had that much experience, but I think I could learn. And I said, I've done a little writing while in the service, but I guess that wouldn't count. So, but I said, anyway, I'd be very happy, and I'd like to give it a go. So we finished the negotiation, I think, the following day, and I was in production. And that's how I got out of engineering, if that's a word, and into the business.
So what were you doing at that point?
Well, the first thing they put me on was a stage manager, and then from stage manager, I went to like an associate director, and then I got a break. I got a break on the Martin and Lewis show. Actually, it's the first start. I had an idea for a sketch, and I sent it in to them, and they liked it, and they did the sketch a period of time later. And I was I finally got my foot in the door for, I think, like $400 or $500 for one quarter of the show. They were doing 5 or 6 shows a year with Colgate Comedy Hour on Sunday night. And then I thought, well, this is very good if I could do it. So I got on the stage managing on Martin and Lewis, and that's how I got to know them, if that's a word. And then I was moved up to associate director on that show. And then Norman Lear, who later he and I became partners, Norman was writing the show with Ed Simmons and I don't know who else, but I remember the two of them. And we became very friendly, and that was when I said to Norman, I'd love to direct this show because I think I could help it. And so he said, well, that's up to Jerry and NBC and all that. And I said, well, what if you say to Jerry, Bud would be a good, to try him. And he said, well, I'll say it. So he did, and Jerry said, yeah, I'd be all for that. He wasn't getting along well with the director at that time. I don't want to mention his name. And so he said, yeah, I'd be good with that. So he called up Pat Weaver, and he said, I can let Bud Yorkin direct my show next year. And Pat Weaver said, well, yeah, who is he? And he said, well, he's working on my show for you guys, NBC. Oh, yeah, that's good. He said, has he ever directed? He said, no, but I think he'd be all right. And, he was the king then, and that's how I started.
How do you direct Martin and Lewis? I mean, it seems like there's...
Well, we never did. We never, ever, in those shows I did about 12 of those, 10 or 12 of those, before I was either going to have a nervous breakdown or deck him with my fist. I wasn't sure which was going to come first. But I never had a run through with him. We never got through a dress rehearsal, ever. So about the last 15 minutes, you'd be just flying. You'd really, really flying.
Why didn't you ever get through the run through?
Well, because they fooled around so much. Jerry did particularly, and then he'd usually do something that would ruin the set or ruin the costume that now they had to spend 15 minutes trying to play around with the costume, whatever. it was just those things, and we just never got it. In fact, I did one show on Martin and Lewis where I walked into I went into the control room about a half hour before we going on the air, and I was going over the shots, trying to figure out if I was covered myself at least on the last portion that we never rehearsed. And I looked over, and the audio man was leaning on the control room on the cover, the desk, or what do they call it?
The audio board, the mixer?
Yeah, like the mixer where he sits. Yeah. And so I'll never forget his name. His name was Red Schultes. And I walked over and I said, "Red, you all right?" And Red, you all right? I tapped him a couple times. And Red had a heart attack. And he was slumped over. Now, probably the most critical job in live television, which all this was audio, because he had three microphone booms to keep out of the shot and mix. He had sound effects. He had an announcer. He had music, big orchestra balance. He had the audience reactions, had to open for it. So it was an unbelievable job. I always thought it was the most difficult job in the thing. And in New York, you have to lay the body down. I hate to be talking about this, but you cover it over until the coroner comes. So we had not a big control room, not very deep. So doing a comedy with a body about 4 feet back of you covered, and a guy that all of a sudden you're into a commercial and you hear some guy yell, "Strike the set!" You got everybody. He couldn't get the mic, couldn't find which microphone was off, and where was the sound on the film, and it was just chaotic. It was just totally chaotic. I've never one of the toughest ones I've seen. So that's what many of the times you got with Martin and Lewis, if we could get through it.
Oh, and you also worked with Abbott and Costello.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked with Abbott and they're both very sweet, dear men. And I think Lou Costello is one of the funniest men I've ever worked with. He would do anything for a laugh. And I think I've told you before that one time, he said we didn't have a finish for a sketch. And he said, "Well, just make a breakaway wall." And he said, and I'll just go through it. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, Bud, come over to me, will be that last bit, and just tell him to grab hold of my coat and throw me through the door." I said, "Sounds okay to me. I guess that would be funny." So they haul up this door, but we only had one, so you couldn't practice it. It was, when you shot it, that was it, And geez, I thought, oh my God, and someone brought the door, and I said, I got to be careful now. Don't throw them too wide, because you got to get right in that spot. Oh, don't worry. But I've been waiting all my life to take Lou and throw him through a door. And so he threw him through the door, And we all looked around and said, "Jesus, you think Lou is going to, Costello is he going to live through this? When's he going to come out?" We were waiting for him. The audience was applauding. Geez, he staggered out. Oh, well, at least he's alive. It was wow. Those two shows were probably the wildest things I ever did in any of my years in live television, between Martin and Lewis and Abbott and Costello. I think it was my first ulcer, too.
So I guess you have to be sort of on your toes all the time as the director. You sort of you got to be prepared for anything. Did they ad-lib on air, or did they just sort of...
Well, they did somewhat. And you didn't have to be a genius to correct them. It's like everything else. You just got to pull back wide and let it fall. But, for the most part, they stuck with it, because they were very much aware that the red light is going to different places, and they know that we've rehearsed all the camera shots and so forth and they blocked it. So they didn't ad-lib too much. I think one of the things that which I think Jerry wrote in his book, one of the problems that Jerry had with Dean, and they had their conflicts, obviously, would be during rehearsal, Dean was very prompt. He'd come in, he was very workmanlike, he'd rather play golf than anything, so let's get in, let's rehearse, and he was heading for Bel Air Country Club to tee off. And Jerry would be one of those that liked to fool around. And now when we'd be rehearsing a sketch, then Dean would come up with a great line, and the whole crew would fall down, and everybody'd be laughing, and it would be, and then we'd move on, and then we'd go on the air 3 days later, or 4 days later, whatever it was, and Jerry pulled Dean's line, and the audience started to applaud, and Dean just looked at it, he couldn't believe it. There's my line that I said 4 days ago, and Jerry's already lifted it and saying it on the air. So they had their conflict there too for a while. Well, for all the way till they broke up, really.
Do not miss the rest of this conversation. In part 2, Bud Yorkin and I spoke about what it was like working with Jack Benny, Bob Hope, Julie Andrews, Fred Astaire, and Danny Kaye. I hope you'll be here. For now, I'm David Levin. Thanks for watching.